Chapter 1. The Vanishing. Leon Bell had always prided himself on being a man who controlled his environment. At 38, he'd built a successful construction company from nothing, turning abandoned lots in Pine Ridge into luxury developments. His calloused hands and steel-gray eyes spoke of a man who'd clawed his way up from poverty, never forgetting the hunger that once gnawed at his belly as a child. But control meant nothing when your 6-year-old son vanished without a trace. Kenny Bell had disappeared on a Tuesday morning while playing in the backyard of their sprawling ranch home. Dixie, Leon's wife of 8 years, claimed she'd stepped inside for barely 5 minutes to answer a phone call. When she returned, Kenny was gone. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, nothing but his abandoned sandbox toys and a gate that someone had left wide open. Leon's first instinct had been to tear the town apart board by board until he found his boy. He'd organized search parties, hired private investigators, and offered a $50,000 reward. For 3 weeks, he barely slept, combing through every inch of the dense woods surrounding Pine Ridge, calling Kenny's name until his voice cracked and bled. The local sheriff, a lazy man named Douglas Clay, seemed more interested in his coffee breaks than finding a missing child. "These things happen, Leon," Clay had said with infuriating calm. "Kids wander off. Sometimes they come back on their own." But Leon knew Kenny wasn't the type to wander. His son was cautious, almost anxious by nature, a trait Leon recognized as inherited from his own childhood spent dodging his alcoholic father's fists. Kenny wouldn't have left the yard willingly. As days stretched into weeks, Leon noticed changes in his wife that made his gut churn with suspicion. Dixie, normally frantic about the smallest scrape on Kenny's knee, seemed oddly composed about their son's disappearance. She'd spend hours on mysterious phone calls, speaking in hushed tones, and hanging up quickly when Leon entered the room. "Who was that?" he'd ask. "Just my sister Claire," Dixie would reply. But Leon had called Claire Clark himself. She hadn't spoken to Dixie in weeks. The breaking point came when Leon discovered Dixie had been secretly meeting with Gabriel Potter, a smooth-talking real estate agent who'd been sniffing around Leon's business for months, trying to convince him to sell prime development land at below-market prices. Leon had followed her to a small diner on the outskirts of town, watching through the window as Gabriel held her hand across the table, both of them laughing while their son was missing. That night, Leon confronted his wife. "How long?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. Dixie's face went pale. "How long what? How long have you been fucking Gabriel Potter while our son is missing?" The slap came hard and fast, but Leon caught her wrist before she could pull away, his grip like a vice. "Don't you ever," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "lie to me again." But instead of breaking down or begging forgiveness, Dixie's expression hardened with a coldness Leon had never seen before. "You want the truth, Leon? Kenny's gone, and he's not coming back. The sooner you accept that, the sooner we can move on with our lives." The words hit Leon like a physical blow. Not just the callousness, but the certainty in her voice. As if she knew something he didn't. Chapter 2. The Sheriff's Decision. 3 days after Leon's confrontation with Dixie, Sheriff Clay called off the official search. "I'm sorry, Leon," Clay said, not meeting his eyes as they stood in the police station's cramped office. "We've exhausted all leads. The boy's gone." Leon stared at the fat man behind the desk, feeling something dark and primal rising in his chest. "Gone? That's it? That's your professional conclusion after 3 weeks?" Clay shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I know this is hard to hear, but sometimes they don't make it back. Could have been an animal attack, could have fallen in the river. Nature's got a way of hiding things." "Bullshit." Leon's voice was steel. "My son didn't just vanish into thin air. Someone took him. You got any evidence of that? Any witnesses? Any ransom demands?" Clay's tone grew defensive. "Because all we got is a missing kid and a lot of theories." Leon studied the sheriff's face, noting the nervous tick in his left eye, the way he kept glancing at his phone. "How much?" Leon asked quietly. "How much what? How much did they pay you to give up?" Clay's face went red. "Now you listen here, Leon. No, you listen." Leon leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I know corruption when I see it. I grew up around dirty cops and bought politicians. Someone got to you, and I'm going to find out who." That evening, Leon returned home to find Dixie packing suitcases in their bedroom. She didn't look up when he entered. "Going somewhere?" he asked. I can't do this anymore, Leon. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. Living with your obsession, your paranoia. It's destroying what's left of our family. Leon watched her fold clothes with mechanical precision, noting she was only packing her belongings. And where exactly are you planning to go? My sister's place in Denver. The lie came smoothly. Claire lived in Seattle, not Denver. Convenient timing, Leon observed. Right after the sheriff gives up, Dixie finally turned to face him, and Leon saw something in her eyes that chilled him. Not grief or fear, but relief. Kenny's gone, Leon. I've accepted it. Maybe you should too. She left that night, taking nothing but her clothes and jewelry. No family photos, no mementos of Kenny, nothing that connected her to the life they'd built together. It was as if she was erasing herself from their story. Leon stood in the empty house, surrounded by the echoes of his son's laughter, and felt the last vestiges of the man he used to be crumble away. In its place, something harder and more dangerous began to take shape. The next morning, he drove to the woods where the search parties had combed every inch of ground. Not to search, he had a different purpose now. If Kenny was truly gone, if his wife had abandoned him, if the system had failed him, then Leon Bell would become something else entirely. He would become the kind of man who made people pay for their betrayals. As he walked the familiar trails, Leon's mind was already working, cataloging names and faces, planning and calculating. Gabriel Potter. Sheriff Clay. His lying wife. They thought they'd won, thought they'd broken him. They had no idea what they'd actually created. Chapter 3. The Toy Truck. Leon's transformation began with methodical precision. For 2 weeks after Dixie left, he threw himself into research, treating his wife's betrayal like a construction project that required careful planning and perfect execution. He started with Gabriel Potter. Gabriel was 34, divorced, and deeper in debt than his flashy lifestyle suggested. Leon discovered through discreet inquiries that Potter had been struggling to make payments on his BMW and his downtown office space. More interesting was Gabriel's background. He'd moved to Pine Ridge only 8 months ago from Las Vegas, leaving behind a trail of failed business ventures and angry creditors. But it was Gabriel's connection to Sheriff Clay that made Leon's blood run cold. Property records showed that Clay had sold a parcel of land to Gabriel for a fraction of its value just 2 months before Kenny disappeared. The same land that Gabriel had been pressuring Leon to sell. Leon spent his evenings parked outside Gabriel's apartment complex, a rundown building that didn't match the man's expensive suits. He watched Gabriel's routine, noting his habits, his visitors, his weaknesses. What he discovered painted a picture of a man living beyond his means, desperate enough to do anything for money, including, perhaps, arranging for a child to disappear. The thought made Leon's hands shake with rage as he gripped his truck's steering wheel. But rage without purpose was useless. Leon had learned that lesson from his father's drunken violence. He needed proof, not just suspicion. That proof came from an unexpected source. On a gray Thursday morning, Leon decided to make one final trip to the woods where Kenny had vanished. Not to search. He'd given up hope of finding his son alive, but to say goodbye to the boy who'd called him Daddy with such trust and love. The forest was different now, darker somehow, as if the trees themselves mourned Kenny's loss. Leon walked the familiar trails, remembering how his son had loved to explore these woods, always eager to discover some new treasure, an interesting rock, a bird's nest, a colorful leaf. It was that memory that led Leon to Kenny's favorite spot, a small clearing where a massive oak tree had fallen years ago, creating a natural playground. Kenny used to pretend the fallen trunk was a spaceship, a fort, a treasure island. Leon had spent countless weekend mornings here, watching his son's imagination transform the simple log into anything his young mind could conceive. And there, partially hidden beneath a pile of autumn leaves, Leon found Kenny's red toy truck. Leon's knees gave out as he picked up the small metal vehicle, remembering how Kenny had carried it everywhere, making engine noises and creating elaborate stories about its adventures. The truck was dirty but undamaged, as if it had been carefully placed rather than dropped in panic. As Leon turned the truck over in his trembling hands, something rattled inside. The toy had a small driver's compartment that opened, a feature Kenny loved because it let him put tiny action figures inside. Leon's fingers fumbled with the mechanism, his vision blurred by tears he refused to shed. When the compartment opened, a small piece of paper fell out. Leon unfolded it with shaking hands, recognizing immediately his son's careful crayon handwriting, the letters still uneven but legible. "Help me, Daddy." The world seemed to tilt around Leon as he stared at the note. Kenny was alive. His son was alive and had somehow managed to leave this message. But where? And how long ago? Leon examined the paper more closely. The crayon marks were faded but not completely weathered, suggesting the note hadn't been outside for the full 3 weeks Kenny had been missing. The paper itself was from a small notebook, the kind used for grocery lists or phone messages. More importantly, the truck's placement seemed deliberate. It was hidden but not buried, positioned where only someone who knew Kenny's habits would think to look. His son had been here, in this exact spot, and had left this message hoping his father would find it. Which meant someone had brought Kenny here, possibly held him nearby, and somehow Kenny had escaped long enough to leave this clue. Leon's grief transformed instantly into cold, calculating fury. His son was out there somewhere, probably terrified, probably hurt, and the people responsible were living their lives as if nothing had happened. As he pocketed the note and the truck, Leon's mind was already working. The location of the truck wasn't random. It was a message in itself. Kenny knew his father would come here eventually. The boy was smart, resourceful, just like Leon had been at that age when survival meant outthinking adults who wanted to hurt him. But Kenny was also running out of time. If he'd escaped once, his captors would be more careful now. Leon had to move fast, but he also had to be smart. Standing in that clearing, surrounded by the echoes of his son's laughter, Leon Bell made a promise that would define everything that came next. He would find Kenny. He would bring him home. And everyone who had played a part in his son's disappearance would pay a price so brutal that their screams would echo through Pine Ridge for generations. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Web of Deceit. Leon's investigation took on a new urgency after finding Kenny's note. He converted his home office into a command center, covering the walls with maps, timelines, and photographs connected by red string like something from a detective thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was his son's life hanging in the balance. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, Ethel Knapp, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from Gabriel Potter's apartment complex. Leon had been conducting door-to-door interviews, hoping someone had noticed unusual activity around the time of Kenny's disappearance. Ethel, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who spent most of her day watching the neighborhood from her front porch, remembered seeing a white van parked behind Gabriel's building multiple times over the past month. "Funny thing about that van," Ethel said, adjusting her glasses as she spoke to Leon. "Had Pennsylvania plates, but the man driving it didn't look like he was from out of state. Too comfortable with the area, if you know what I mean." She described the driver as a tall, thin man with graying hair and a distinctive limp. Walked like he'd hurt his left leg bad at some point. And he was always carrying a black duffel bag when he went into that building. Leon felt his pulse quicken. A man with a limp and Pennsylvania plates. It was more than he'd had to work with before. He thanked Ethel and immediately drove to Gabriel's apartment, parking where he could observe the building without being seen. For 3 days, Leon maintained surveillance, sleeping in his truck and living off coffee and vending machine sandwiches. On the 3rd night, his patience was rewarded. A white van with Pennsylvania plates pulled into the parking lot at 2:17 a.m. Leon watched through binoculars as a tall, thin man with an obvious limp climbed out, carrying a black duffel bag. The man looked around nervously before heading toward Gabriel's building. Leon followed at a distance, watching as the man entered through a side door that Gabriel had left propped open. Voices drifted from an open window on the 2nd floor, Gabriel's apartment. Moving closer, Leon positioned himself beneath the window, straining to catch fragments of the conversation above. Getting too risky. Gabriel's voice, tense and worried. Should have handled it different from the start. The stranger's voice was gravelly, with a slight accent Leon couldn't place. The kid's note, "If Belle finds." Leon's blood turned to ice. They were talking about Kenny, about the note. Which meant they knew Kenny had escaped, at least temporarily. Move him again tonight. Leon's mind raced. They were planning to move Kenny tonight. He had to act fast, but he also had to be smart. Bursting in now might get Kenny killed if he wasn't here. He needed to follow the van, find where they were taking his son. As quietly as possible, Leon retreated to his truck and waited. An hour later, the man with the limp emerged, still carrying the duffel bag, but walking with more urgency. Gabriel followed him to the van, and Leon could see them having an intense conversation before Gabriel handed over what looked like an envelope. The van pulled out of the parking lot, and Leon followed at a distance, keeping his headlights off whenever possible. They drove through Pine Ridge's quiet streets, then out onto the rural highways that led deeper into the forest. 20 minutes later, the van turned onto a dirt road Leon didn't recognize. He parked his truck and continued on foot, using his phone's dim light to navigate the rough terrain. The van's taillights disappeared around a bend, but Leon could hear the engine growing more distant. After walking for nearly half a mile, Leon saw lights ahead, a small cabin nestled in a clearing, almost invisible from the main road. The van was parked beside it, and Leon could see movement inside the cabin through the windows. Crouching behind a fallen log, Leon watched as the man with the limp carried boxes from the cabin to the van. Gabriel was there too, looking nervous and constantly checking his phone. But what made Leon's heart race was the sight of a small shadow moving past one of the cabin's windows, a child-sized silhouette that could only be Kenny. Leon's every instinct screamed at him to charge the cabin, to tear through those walls and rescue his son. But the rational part of his mind, the part that had built a successful business through careful planning and calculated risks, held him back. There were at least 2 armed men in that cabin, and Leon had no idea what other security measures they might have in place. More importantly, he still didn't understand the full scope of the conspiracy against him. Gabriel and this stranger were clearly working together, but who else was involved? Sheriff Clay's suspicious behavior suggested the corruption went deeper than just a cheating wife and her lover. As Leon watched, Gabriel received a phone call. Even from his hiding spot, Leon could hear the man's agitated voice rising as he paced back and forth. "What do you mean someone's been asking questions?" "No." Clay said he called off the search. "Who's been talking to people in the neighborhood?" Leon's blood ran cold. Someone had reported his activities to Gabriel. Someone was feeding information to the kidnappers, keeping them one step ahead of any investigation. "We need to move faster." "Yes, tonight. I don't care what Bell thinks he knows." The call ended, and Gabriel said something to the man with the limp that made both of them look toward the woods where Leon was hiding. For a terrifying moment, Leon thought he'd been spotted, but then they turned back to their packing with renewed urgency. Leon had learned enough. Kenny was alive and in that cabin, but they were preparing to move him. He had maybe an hour, possibly less, before his son disappeared again, perhaps permanently this time. As he carefully retreated through the woods, Leon's mind was already formulating a plan. But this wouldn't be a simple rescue mission. Gabriel Potter and his accomplices had destroyed Leon's family, terrorized his son, and corrupted the very system that was supposed to protect them. They thought they were dealing with a broken, desperate father. They were about to learn they'd awakened something far more dangerous. Chapter 5, The Trap. Leon Bell had learned patience in the construction business, how to wait for the right moment, how to ensure every piece was in place before making the crucial move. But with Kenny's life hanging in the balance, patience felt like torture. Still, rushing in would get his son killed. Back at his truck, Leon called the one person he trusted, Tyler Mullen, his foreman and closest friend since childhood. Tyler had grown up on the same brutal streets as Leon, and like Leon, he'd learned that sometimes the law wasn't enough to protect the innocent. "I need your help," Leon said when Tyler answered. "And I need you to ask no questions until after it's over." "You found Kenny?" Tyler's voice was immediately alert. "Maybe, but I need backup, and I need it quiet." Within 30 minutes, Tyler arrived with his own truck and a duffel bag that Leon didn't ask about. Tyler's military background made him someone Leon could rely on in a crisis, and his loyalty was absolute. "What's the play?" Tyler asked as Leon quickly briefed him on the situation. "We take the cabin, but not until I know who else is involved in this." Leon's voice was steady, controlled. Gabriel made a phone call. "Someone's been feeding him information about my investigation. I need to know who before we move." Leon handed Tyler a prepaid cell phone. "I'm going to call Gabriel, pretend I've given up looking for Kenny. See if I can get him to reveal his contact." The call connected on the third ring. "Gabriel Potter." The voice was tense, wary. This is Leon Bell. A long pause. Leon, I heard about Kenny. I'm sorry, man. That's terrible. The fake sympathy in Gabriel's voice made Leon's jaw clench, but he kept his tone defeated, broken. The sheriff called off the search. Dixie left me. I wanted to apologize for what I said before. About you and her. I wasn't thinking straight. Hey, no problem. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. The thing is, Leon continued, I'm selling the business. The house. Everything. I can't stay in Pine Ridge anymore. Too many memories. Leon could almost hear Gabriel's heart rate increase. Selling? You mean the construction company? Everything. The land deals you were asking about? They're yours if you still want them. Whatever price you think is fair. Another pause. Then Gabriel's voice became more animated. Leon, you don't want to make decisions like that when you're grieving. Maybe we should talk in person. Make sure you're thinking clearly. No, I've made up my mind. But I do have one question. Leon's voice hardened slightly. How did you know to call off your interest in the properties at exactly the right time? It's like someone told you I'd be desperate to sell. The silence stretched long enough that Leon thought Gabriel might hang up. Finally, I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. Someone's been keeping you informed about my situation. About the investigation. About when the sheriff would give up. Leon let the accusation hang in the air. Leon, you're not making sense. I think you need help. I think you need to tell me who your inside man is, Gabriel. Because I'm going to find out anyway, and it'll go easier for everyone if you just tell me now. The line went dead. Leon immediately called Tyler. They know I'm onto them. We move now. But as Leon started his truck, his phone rang. Unknown number. Leon Bell. The voice was gruff, unfamiliar. Yeah. You need to stop what you're doing. Right now. Who is this? Someone who's trying to save your life. Walk away from this, Leon. Take what's left of your family and disappear. Leon felt cold fury building in his chest. Is this the son of a bitch who took my boy? Your boy's already dead, Leon. Has been for weeks. What you think you found was just someone playing games with your head. The line went dead, but Leon was already driving toward the cabin, Tyler following in his own truck. The anonymous caller had just made a critical mistake. He'd revealed that they knew about the note, about Kenny's toy truck. Only someone directly involved in the kidnapping would know those details, which meant Kenny was still alive. As they approached the dirt road leading to the cabin, Leon's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop now or the boy dies. Leon showed the message to Tyler, who just nodded grimly. Means we're close. They parked their trucks a quarter-mile from the cabin and approached on foot through the dense woods. Leon carried a hunting rifle he'd grabbed from home, while Tyler's military training made him comfortable with whatever he'd brought in his duffel bag. The cabin was dark except for a single light in what appeared to be the back room. The white van was gone, but Leon could see fresh tire tracks indicating it had left recently. They moved him, Tyler whispered. But as they crept closer, Leon spotted something that made his blood freeze. A small piece of red fabric tied to a tree branch near the cabin's back window. Fabric that matched the shirt Kenny had been wearing the day he disappeared. It was another message from his son. Leon pointed out the marker to Tyler, who nodded understanding. Kenny was still here, or had been very recently. The boy was smart enough to leave clues, brave enough to take risks to communicate with his father, which meant Leon's son was counting on him to come. As they positioned themselves around the cabin, Leon made a promise to the boy he'd raised to be strong and clever. Daddy's coming, Kenny. And when this is over, everyone who hurt you is going to pay. Chapter 6. The Rescue. The cabin was a trap, but not the kind Leon had expected. As he and Tyler moved into position, Leon realized the building was too quiet, too still. The single light in the back room cast shadows that didn't move, and there were no sounds of human occupation, no footsteps, no voices, no signs of life. Tyler signaled from his position near the front door, pointing to fresh footprints in the mud leading away from the cabin toward the woods. Someone had left in a hurry, probably after the phone call Leon had made to Gabriel. But Kenny's red fabric marker meant his son had been here recently. Leon approached the back window where the fabric was tied, peering through the dusty glass into what appeared to be a small bedroom. The space was empty except for a mattress on the floor and a small table. But there, scratched into the wooden wall near the window, were letters carved with something sharp. Dad. His son had been in this room, had been close enough to the window to tie fabric to the tree branch outside. Kenny was alive, and he'd been trying to communicate. Tyler appeared beside him, having circled the cabin. "Building's empty," he whispered. "But there's evidence someone was living here. Food containers, sleeping bags, and Leon." Tyler held up a small object. "I found this by the front door." It was Kenny's other toy, a small action figure that never left his son's pocket. But wrapped around the figure's waist was a piece of paper, so small it was almost invisible. Leon unfolded it carefully, revealing another message in Kenny's handwriting. "Barn, red roof, hill." Leon's mind raced as he tried to think of red-roofed barns in the area. There were several old farms scattered throughout the hills around Pine Ridge, but only one with a distinctive red roof that could be seen from the main highway. The old Henderson place, abandoned for over a decade. "I know where they took him," Leon said, pocketing the action figure. But as they prepared to leave, Tyler grabbed Leon's arm. "Wait. Listen." In the distance, Leon could hear the sound of vehicles approaching on the dirt road. Multiple engines, moving fast. "They're coming back," Tyler said. "Or someone else's." Leon's mind calculated quickly. The approaching vehicles could be Gabriel and his associates returning, or they could be law enforcement responding to reports of suspicious activity. Either way, being found at the cabin would complicate everything. But as the sound grew closer, Leon recognized the distinctive rumble of Sheriff Clay's patrol car mixed with at least two other vehicles. "Clay's coming," Leon told Tyler. "Which means Gabriel called him." Tyler checked his watch. "We can reach the Henderson farm in 20 minutes if we move now. But if we stay to face Clay, we lose Kenny." Leon's decision was immediate. "Go. I'll handle Clay." "Leon, if Gabriel's got Clay in his pocket, then I'll deal with that too." Leon's voice carried a cold finality that Tyler recognized from their childhood, when Leon had faced down neighborhood bullies twice his size. Tyler nodded reluctantly and melted back into the woods, heading toward his truck via a route that would keep him hidden from the approaching vehicles. Leon positioned himself near the cabin's front door, rifle in hand, but not raised aggressively. He needed to play this carefully, appear cooperative while gathering information about how deep the corruption went. Sheriff Clay's patrol car emerged from the woods first, followed by two other vehicles, Gabriel's BMW and a black pickup truck Leon didn't recognize. 4 men got out, and Leon immediately noted that Clay was wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying a shotgun. This wasn't a welfare check. This was an execution squad. "Leon Bell," Clay called out, his voice carrying artificial authority. "Put down your weapon and step away from the building." Leon remained motionless. "This is private property, Sheriff. What's your probable cause?" "Probable cause?" Gabriel's voice was sharp with nervous energy. "You've been stalking me, making threats." "Clay, arrest him." But Clay seemed more cautious, studying Leon's position and the rifle in his hands. "Leon, we just want to talk. Put the gun down and nobody gets hurt." Leon laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Nobody gets hurt? Sheriff, my son's been missing for over a month. My wife's run off with this piece of shit." He gestured toward Gabriel. "And now you show up in the middle of the night with weapons drawn. I think someone's planning to get hurt, and it isn't any of you." The fourth man, who'd emerged from the black pickup, stepped forward. Leon recognized him immediately as the man with the limp from Gabriel's apartment, Kenny's kidnapper. "This is taking too long," the man said, his voice carrying the same gravelly tone Leon had heard from beneath Gabriel's window. "We should have handled this problem weeks ago." And that's when Leon understood the full scope of what he was facing. This wasn't just about Gabriel wanting Dixie, or even about forcing Leon to sell his property. This was about eliminating the one person who wouldn't stop looking for Kenny. They'd taken his son not just to hurt him, but to drive him to exactly this moment. Isolated, desperate, and apparently helpless against a conspiracy that reached into the sheriff's department itself. But they'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd underestimated what Leon Bell was willing to do to save his son. "You know what, Sheriff?" Leon said, his voice carrying across the clearing with deadly calm. "I think you're right. It is time for someone to get hurt." The night erupted in violence, but not the kind any of them had expected. Chapter 7, Blood in the Woods. Leon's first shot took out the headlight on Clay's patrol car, plunging half the clearing into darkness and sending all 4 men diving for cover. He deliberately missed the men. He needed information, and dead men couldn't talk. but their response told him everything he needed to know about their intentions. Clay immediately opened fire with his shotgun, the blast splintering the cabin's front door inches from where Leon had been standing. Gabriel scrambled behind his BMW, pulling a pistol from his jacket, while the man with the limp produced a military-style rifle from the pickup truck. These weren't law enforcement tactics. This was an assassination. Leon rolled behind the cabin's stone foundation as bullets shattered windows above his head. His military surplus radio crackled with Tyler's voice. "Leon, I can hear gunfire. What's your status?" "For hostiles," Leon responded quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Clay, Gabriel, and 2 others. They came here to kill me. I'm 10 minutes from the Henderson farm. Kenny's not there. Place is empty." Leon's heart sank, but he forced himself to focus on immediate survival. "Keep looking. I'll handle this." A voice called out from the darkness. Gabriel, trying to sound reasonable despite having just attempted murder. "Leon, you're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and we can work something out." Leon's response was to put a rifle bullet through the BMW's engine block. The car died with a grinding shudder, stranding Gabriel in the open. "Counteroffer," Leon shouted back. "Tell me where my son is, and I'll let you live long enough to confess to your crimes." Clay's voice joined the negotiation, but his words revealed the depth of his corruption. "Leon, you're interfering with an ongoing federal investigation. Stand down immediately." "Federal investigation?" Leon almost laughed. "Into what, Clay?" "Your side business in child trafficking." The silence that followed confirmed Leon's worst fears. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about something much darker. The man with the limp ended the conversation by opening fire with his rifle, sending a stream of bullets that forced Leon to crawl along the cabin's foundation toward the back of the building. As he moved, he spotted something that made his blood freeze. Fresh tire tracks leading away from the cabin's rear, not toward the road, but deeper into the woods along what looked like an old logging trail. They'd moved Kenny while Leon was talking to Gabriel on the phone. His son was somewhere in these woods, probably in another vehicle, getting farther away with each passing minute. Leon's radio crackled again. "Henderson Farm's deserted, but I found something. Fresh tire tracks and—" Tyler's voice hesitated. "Leon, there's a piece of Kenny's jacket caught on a fence post here. He was here within the last few hours." Which meant Kenny had been moved from the cabin to the Henderson farm, then moved again when Leon got too close. They were staying one step ahead, using Kenny as a lure to draw Leon into increasingly dangerous situations. But they'd also made a mistake. By moving Kenny so frequently, they were leaving a trail. "Tyler," Leon whispered into the radio. "Follow the tracks from Henderson's. But be careful, this is bigger than we thought." Leon needed to end the standoff at the cabin quickly and get back to tracking his son. But 4 armed men had him pinned down, and they showed no interest in taking him alive. That's when Leon remembered the propane tank he'd spotted behind the cabin, the kind used for heating in remote locations. Sometimes the best offense was a really big distraction. Leon worked his way around the cabin's perimeter, staying low and using the building's bulk to shield himself from the gunfire that continued to pepper the woods around him. When he reached the propane tank, he could see it was connected to the cabin's heating system via a flexible line. One rifle shot into the tank's valve would create a massive gas leak. A second shot, properly timed, would turn the entire clearing into an inferno. Leon positioned himself for the shot, then called out, "Gabriel, I want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "My life for information about Kenny. I'll come out unarmed if you tell me where my son is." He could hear the men conferring in hushed voices. Finally, Gabriel responded, "How do we know you won't try something?" "Because I'm a father who wants his son back alive. And because you've got 4 guns pointed at me." Leon waited, listening to their discussion. They were arguing about whether to trust him, whether they needed him alive for information, whether killing him now would solve their problems or create new ones. While they debated, Leon lined up his shot on the propane tank. "All right, Leon," Clay finally called out. "Come out slowly, hands visible, weapon on the ground." Leon's response was to put a bullet directly into the tank's valve. The hissing sound of escaping gas was audible even over the men's shouts of alarm. They had maybe 2 minutes before the gas concentration reached dangerous levels. "Change of plans," Leon announced loudly. "You've got 90 seconds to tell me where Kenny is before this whole clearing goes up in flames." The panic in their voices was immediate and gratifying. These men had been willing to kill a father searching for his son, but they weren't prepared to die for their conspiracy. "He's at the old mining camp," Gabriel shouted. 3 miles north of Henderson's place. "Now shut off the gas." Leon smiled grimly in the darkness. The old mining camp, he knew the place. Abandoned copper mine with several buildings, remote enough that no one would hear a child's cries for help. "Thank you for your cooperation," Leon called back. Then he put his second bullet into the gas cloud. The explosion lit up the night sky like dawn breaking early, the fireball reaching 50 feet into the air and turning the cabin into an instant bonfire. Leon, shielded by the stone foundation and having covered his ears, was thrown forward by the blast but emerged uninjured. He couldn't say the same for Gabriel Potter and his associates. As Leon picked himself up from the ground, he could see 3 figures stumbling away from the inferno, their clothes singed and their weapons scattered. The fourth, the man with the limp, wasn't moving at all. Leon retrieved his rifle and walked toward the survivors, his silhouette framed by the burning cabin behind him. "Now," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd just demonstrated exactly how far he was willing to go, "let's discuss the details of this mining camp." Sheriff Clay, his uniform smoking and his face blackened with soot, looked up at Leon with something that might have been respect mixed with terror. "Jesus Christ, Leon. You could have killed us all." Leon's smile was as cold as winter morning. "I still can." Chapter 8. The Mining Camp. The old Copper Ridge mining camp squatted in the forest like a cancerous growth, its weathered buildings clustered around the dark mouth of an abandoned shaft. Leon approached on foot, having left his truck a mile back, and made his way through the woods using paths he'd learned as a teenager when he and Tyler used to explore these mountains. Sheriff Clay's confession at gunpoint had revealed the basic outline of the conspiracy. Gabriel Potter and an unnamed partner had been buying up distressed properties throughout the county, using intimidation and violence when owners wouldn't sell. Kenny's kidnapping was meant to pressure Leon into giving up his prime development land at a fraction of its value. Clay had been paid to ensure any investigations went nowhere. But there were still pieces missing from the puzzle, and Leon suspected the worst revelations were yet to come. Tyler's voice crackled through the radio. "I'm in position on the ridge overlooking the camp. Count 3 buildings, main office, bunkhouse, and what looks like a workshop. Lights in the office building, movement inside. At least 2 people, possibly more." Leon studied the camp through his binoculars. The office building's windows were covered with newspapers and cardboard, but he could see the flicker of artificial light through the gaps. More importantly, he could see a small window on the building's side that was uncovered, and through it, the unmistakable silhouette of someone small, someone child-sized. "Kenny, I see him," Leon whispered into the radio. "Office building, side window. He's alive." But as Leon watched, he saw something that made his blood boil. An adult figure moved past the window, and Leon caught a glimpse of the person's face illuminated by the interior light. Dixie, his wife, Kenny's mother, was in that building with their kidnapped son. Leon had to grip a tree trunk to steady himself as the full magnitude of the betrayal crashed over him. Dixie hadn't just left him for Gabriel Potter. She'd been part of the kidnapping from the beginning. She'd helped them take Kenny, had probably been the one to leave the gate open that morning, had played the grieving mother while knowing exactly where her son was. Tyler's voice brought him back to the present. "Leon, you okay? Your vitals just spiked." Leon forced his voice to remain steady. "Dixie's in there. She's part of this." A long pause. Then Tyler's voice carried a note of barely controlled rage. "That bitch. Leon, I can take the shot from here." Clean shot through the window. "No." Leon's voice was steel. "I want answers first. I want to know why." But even as he said it, Leon was beginning to understand. Dixie had always been ambitious, always frustrated by their middle-class lifestyle despite Leon's success. She'd grown up wealthy, the daughter of a family that had lost their fortune in bad investments, and she'd never adjusted to being anything less than rich. The property Gabriel wanted from Leon was worth millions in development potential. If they could force him to sell cheap, then resell to the right buyers. "Tyler, I'm going in. If shooting starts, prioritize Kenny's safety over everything else." "Copy that." "Leon." Tyler's voice carried the weight of their long friendship. "Be careful in there. Something about this whole setup feels wrong." Leon was beginning to feel the same way. The camp was too exposed, too obvious. If they'd been moving Kenny multiple times to stay ahead of Leon's investigation, why bring him to such an isolated location? Unless this was exactly where they wanted Leon to come. As Leon crept closer to the office building, he noticed details that confirmed his growing suspicion. The other buildings showed no signs of recent use, but the office had been carefully prepared for occupation. Fresh tire tracks led to a hidden parking area behind the building. Most telling of all, the uncovered window that had allowed him to see Kenny was positioned perfectly for observation from the ridge where Tyler was positioned. They'd left that window uncovered on purpose. They wanted Leon to see his son. This was a trap, but not the kind designed to capture him. This was something worse, a trap designed to break him. Leon's radio crackled with Tyler's urgent whisper. Vehicle approaching from the south. Black SUV moving fast. Leon duck-walked to a position where he could see the access road. The SUV that emerged from the tree line was expensive, government-issue looking. When it stopped in front of the office building, four people got out, all carrying professional-grade weapons and moving with military precision. But it was the fifth person who made Leon's world tilt on its axis. Sheriff Clay emerged from the SUV, very much alive despite the explosion at the cabin, and very much in charge of the operation. The man Leon had left injured and defeated was now coordinating with what appeared to be a federal task force. Tyler, Leon whispered, we've been played. Clay wasn't a corrupt cop working for Gabriel. Gabriel was working for Clay, which meant everything Leon thought he understood about the conspiracy was wrong. The property grab, the kidnapping, even Dixie's involvement, it was all part of something much larger and more dangerous than he'd imagined. As Leon watched from his hiding place, Clay spoke into a radio. Bell's here. Just like you said he'd be. What's the next phase? The response came through clearly enough for Leon to hear. Bring him inside. It's time he learned the truth about his son. Leon's blood turned to ice as he recognized the voice on the radio. It was his own brother, Sam Bell, who'd supposedly died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Chapter 9. The Truth Unveiled. The office building's interior was a study in calculated psychology. Kenny sat in a corner, unharmed but clearly frightened, while Dixie paced near a makeshift desk covered with documents. The room was lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in sharp relief, and Leon could see immediately that his son hadn't been tortured or abused. He'd been kept as leverage. But it was the man sitting behind the desk who commanded Leon's attention. Sam Bell, 3 years older than Leon and supposedly 3 years dead, looking very much alive and very much in control. Hello, little brother, Sam said, his voice carrying the same mixture of affection and condescension it had when they were children. You always were too stubborn for your own good. Leon stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 armed men who'd escorted him inside after he'd surrendered himself in exchange for Kenny's safety. His rifle had been taken, but his mind was still working, still calculating angles and opportunities. The funeral, Leon said quietly. I buried you. There was a flag ceremony. Sam smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Military intelligence has its advantages. Sometimes a man needs to die in order to live freely. And Kenny? Leon's voice was barely controlled. What was this? Some kind of sick family reunion. Dixie spoke for the first time since Leon had entered, her voice defensive but lacking any real conviction. Leon, you have to understand. Shut up. Leon's command was so sharp that Dixie actually stepped backward. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my dead brother who apparently kidnapped my son. Sam leaned back in his chair, studying Leon with the analytical gaze that had made him successful in military intelligence. Kenny was never in any real danger. He's been fed, clothed, entertained. Hell, we even let him keep his toys. His toys? Leon's voice rose. You mean the ones he used to leave me messages? The ones he used to tell me he was alive when you wanted everyone to think he was dead? Sam's smile widened. You always were the smart one in the family. Yes, we allowed Kenny to leave those messages. We wanted you to find them. Leon felt the last pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, and the picture they formed was more horrifying than anything he'd imagined. This whole thing, the kidnapping, the investigation, leading me here, it was all orchestrated. Very good. Sam stood up, walking around the desk to face his brother directly. You see, Leon, I have a problem. Several problems, actually. I've been running certain operations overseas that require funding and resources. The kind of funding that comes from real estate development in growing markets like Pine Ridge. Leon's construction business. His property holdings. His entire life's work. You could have just asked, Leon said. Sam laughed. Could I? The Leon Bell I knew growing up would never have willingly handed over his business to his supposedly dead brother. You'd have wanted explanations, involvement, oversight. That wasn't going to work for my situation. So you decided to destroy my family instead. I decided to motivate you. Sam's voice hardened. See, I know you, Leon. Better than anyone. You're not motivated by money or threats or rational argument. But you are motivated by family. By protecting the people you love. Leon looked at Kenny, who was watching the conversation with the wide-eyed confusion of a child trying to understand adult insanity. Then he looked at Dixie, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet his eyes. How long? Leon asked her. How long have you been working with him? Dixie's voice was barely audible. Since before we were married. The words hit Leon like a physical blow. His entire marriage, his son's birth, the life he'd built, all of it had been orchestrated by his brother as part of some long-term manipulation. Dixie was supposed to convince you to sell the business. Sam continued conversationally. Move somewhere else, start over. But you were too attached to Pine Ridge, too stubborn about your success here. So we had to try more aggressive methods. Like kidnapping my son. Like borrowing your son, Sam corrected. Temporarily. Just long enough to make you understand what really matters in life. Leon looked around the room, taking inventory. 2 armed guards by the door, Sheriff Clay standing near the window, Dixie by the desk, Sam in the center of it all. And Kenny, his 6-year-old son who'd been used as a pawn in a game Leon was only now beginning to understand. There's just one problem with your plan, Sam, Leon said quietly. What's that? Leon's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. You forgot what I learned growing up in the same house you did. You forgot what Dad taught us both when he used his fists to solve problems. Sam's expression changed, becoming wary. Leon, you forgot that I'm not the same scared kid who used to hide in closets when Dad came home drunk. You forgot that I spent 20 years building a business that required me to be harder than anyone else, tougher than anyone else, more ruthless than anyone else. Leon took a step toward his brother, and both guards raised their weapons. And you really forgot, Leon continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, that I would do absolutely anything to protect my son. The explosion that rocked the building came from outside, Tyler's diversionary charge that Leon had signaled for by leaving his hat on the windowsill. In the chaos that followed, as the lights went out and armed men shouted orders in the darkness, Leon moved with the precision of a man who'd spent 3 weeks planning for exactly this moment. The first guard went down to a hammer blow that Leon had concealed in his boot, a tool that was both weapon and symbol of the honest work Sam had tried to steal from him. The second guard fell to a move Leon had learned in construction site fights, a knee to the solar plexus that left the man gasping and helpless. Sheriff Clay reached for his weapon, but Tyler's sniper rifle ended that threat with a shot through the window that dropped the corrupt sheriff permanently. Dixie screamed and reached for Kenny, but Leon caught her wrist in a grip that would leave bruises for weeks. Don't, he said, his voice carrying lethal promise. Don't you dare touch my son. Sam had drawn his own weapon, a military-issue pistol that he pointed at Leon with professional competence. You always were too emotional, little brother. That's why you never would have succeeded in my line of work. My line of work, Leon replied, builds things that last. Your line of work destroys families. Families? Sam laughed. Leon, you still don't understand. There never was a family. There was just you, your resources, and my need for both. The gunshot that ended Sam Bell's life came from an unexpected source. Kenny, only 6 years old but already showing the survival instincts that ran in the Bell family bloodline, had picked up the first guard's dropped weapon and fired it with the desperate courage of a child protecting his father. As Sam fell, as the echoes of gunfire faded, as Tyler's voice called, "All clear," from outside, Leon knelt beside his son and pulled the boy into his arms. It's over, Kenny, he whispered. Daddy's here now. It's over. But as he held his son, Leon looked at Dixie, who was cowering against the wall, finally understanding that her elaborate deception had collapsed, and his voice carried a promise that would define the rest of their lives. For some people, he said, his words directed at his wife, but his meaning extending to anyone who had ever betrayed his family. It's just beginning. Leon Bell had learned that family wasn't about blood or marriage certificates or legal documents. Family was about loyalty, about protection, about never abandoning the people who depended on you. Kenny was family. Everyone else was just a problem to be solved. Epilogue. 6 months later, Pine Ridge had a new sheriff, Tyler Mullen, whose military background and absolute integrity made him the town council's unanimous choice. The old mining camp had been converted into a memorial park for missing children, funded by the sale of certain real estate holdings that had somehow become available at very reasonable prices. Dixie Bell had disappeared entirely, though rumors persisted that she'd been seen in various cities throughout the country, always looking over her shoulder, always moving. Some people said she was running from federal investigators looking into her role in the conspiracy. Others whispered that she was running from something else entirely, from the kind of man who never forgot a betrayal and never forgave. Leon Bell rebuilt his business stronger than ever, but he also rebuilt his life around the one principle that had never failed him: protecting the people who earned his loyalty while ensuring that those who betrayed that trust paid a price that would serve as a lesson to others. Kenny Bell grew up understanding that the world could be dangerous, that people could be cruel, but that there would always be someone watching over him. Someone who would move heaven and earth to keep him safe. And in the quiet mountains around Pine Ridge, the Bell family name carried a reputation that was spoken with respect by friends and whispered with fear by anyone foolish enough to consider crossing them. Some lessons, once learned, were never forgotten. Some debts, once incurred, were never forgiven. Some men, once awakened to their true nature, were never again to be underestimated. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.